Hey guys, tonight we're stepping softly into the sunlit courtyards of Moorish Spain, where tiled fountains trickle gently. The scent of orange blossoms drifts through shaded arches, and children's lives were ruled by rules as intricate as the geometric carvings above them. You probably wouldn't survive if you lived there, not because of war or famine, but because childhood came with expectations as rigid and elegant as the architecture itself. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're watching from somewhere special tonight, tell me in the comments, where are you and what time is it there? Now? Dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You are small, maybe 4 years old, and you walk in soft sandals across a floor of cool mosaic tiles. Around you, the palace hums with quiet activity, low voices behind cedar doors, the faint click of a scholar's inkwell, the brush of a silk curtain in the breeze. This is all Andalus in its golden age, where Cordoba rivals Baghdad in wisdom and light. But you don't get to admire the domes just yet. You're being watched. A nursemaid trails you at a measured distance. Her eyes miss nothing, even when she pretends to fix her veil. She isn't just there to guide you, she's there to mold you. In Moorish Spain, children don't grow up as much as they are sculpted, chiseled down to the shape of their family's expectations. You learn early that every gesture matters. How you bow, how you speak, how you carry your cup. None of it is your own. You are a reflection of lineage, of piety, of civilization itself. Your cradle wasn't just a place to rest. It had rules too. Babies were swaddled tightly to prevent wayward limbs from expressing wildness. Arms belonged at your sides, hands folded or hidden, already a lesson in restraint. As you learn to walk, your path is laid out carefully. You're not supposed to dash around wildly or shout with laughter. Those things belong to the desert tribes, the uncultured, the outsiders. You are being shaped into something quieter, more controlled. Even playtime feels like practice. Pebbles become counters for counting. Sticks become pens. Games are word-based, memory-based. You recite the names of the caliphs backwards. You point out animals in Arabic, Berber, and Latin. No one tells you these are lessons. They just watch to see if you remember. Your father might never pick you up. That's not seen as neglect, it's dignity. Children are to be loved, yes, but from a respectable distance. Your mother offers warmth in measured doses, but not in front of guests. Too much affection is seen as indulgence. Sometimes, you see other children in the courtyard, sons of merchants, daughters of poets. The daughters walk behind their mothers with small, careful steps, never breaking the rhythm. The sons might be dressed as mini scholars, in robes a little too big for their shoulders. Even laughter, when allowed, sounds subdued, as if it's wearing gloves. The gardens are beautiful, but you don't run through them. You observe. You are taught to stop and identify the scent of each flower, to note how the shadows fall against the colonnades. A distracted child is a missed opportunity. You hear adults speaking often of adab, a word that means manners, but also literature, grace, morality, and inner discipline. It's not enough to behave. You must feel the weight of your role, even before you understand why. You bow your head when passing older people. You speak only when spoken to. You answer questions with formality, never casual tone. Historians still argue whether this was kindness disguised as control or control disguised as love. You're not alone in this world, of course. There are older siblings, cousins, children of servants. But even among them, there's a hierarchy. A child whose father owns books outranks a child whose father tills land. A boy may interrupt a girl, but never the other way around. Still, Some nights you sneak a look through the lattice screen into the adult salon. There, stories flow more freely. Poets laugh without restraint. Philosophers argue over coffee. The same people who correct your posture with a raised eyebrow now slouch with abandon. It's confusing. You wonder, will you ever be allowed to relax like that? At nap time, your room is cool and dim, but not empty. A slave girl sits silently in the corner, spinning thread. She hums a tune older than Cordoba. It's not the same lullaby your mother sings, but you like hers better. You're not supposed to say so. One evening, a cousin visits from the countryside. He stomps through the garden, chases a cat, and shouts with glee. The adults smile politely, but later you hear them whisper, "Lacks refinement." You learn something then, not just about behavior, but about judgment. Even as a child, you are being compared, measured, ranked. At sunset, the muezzin calls out from the minaret. Your day is winding down. You say your prayers, wash your face carefully, and recite your verses aloud. Not because someone tells you to, but because they're listening through the wall. When you finally curl under the embroidered quilt, you're tired, yes, but not in the way of a carefree child. You've held your body still for hours, watched your words like polished stones, bowed when expected, smiled only when permitted, and tomorrow, it all begins again. Because here, in Moorish Spain, childhood is not a pause before adulthood. It's the first performance in a lifelong play of grace, learning, and invisible rules. You wake before the sun does. The courtyard is still cloaked in a soft, bluish silence. Your sandals make the faintest sound as you shuffle toward the study room, already dressed in your pale tunic, its seams carefully stitched by a mother who believes every thread is a moral. A servant has lit the oil lamp early today, the one shaped like a pomegranate, casting gentle shadows across the pages that await you. This is not a school, as you might know it. There are no playgrounds, no squeaky chairs, no cheerful murals on the walls. Instead, you find yourself sitting cross-legged on a woven mat, alongside 5 other children, boys only, for now. Each of you faces the teacher, who rests against a small cushion, his white beard catching the gold of the lamp. His name is Sayyid Idris. No one calls him anything else. You open your wooden tablet. It's not for drawing, it's for copying the sacred words, each letter inked carefully, then wiped clean the next day. The repetition isn't punishment, it's purification. Sayyid Idris does not raise his voice. He doesn't need to. When he speaks, the room stills. Bismillah, he begins, as always, and you repeat it, in the name of God. Everything starts with that. At just 6 years old, you're expected to recite. The Quran is not a book to read. It's a river to memorize, one verse at a time, and it flows through your mind in patterns, in rhythm, like a lullaby you're not allowed to forget. You chant softly, not daring to look around, and it's not just the holy verses. Sayyid Idris teaches language like it's weaponry. You learn the different names for a lion, 7 of them, actually, each with a slightly different shade of strength. One for when the lion is resting, one for when it prowls, one for when it kills. Why do you need so many words for the same beast? Because here, words are power, and you are being trained to wield them. Historians still argue whether this early education was a gift or a burden. But you don't have the luxury of asking. You're too busy remembering the difference between ilm, knowledge, and hikmah, wisdom. Because if Sayyid asks and you hesitate, he'll simply say nothing. And that silence will echo louder than any scolding. Sometimes he quizzes you in riddles. What is lighter than a feather, but no man can carry? You think, you blink, someone whispers, guilt, and you feel it land like a pebble in a still pond. You are praised not with hugs or stickers, but with nods. A quiet murmur of "Mashallah" from Sayyid Idris means you've done well. and that murmur stays with you longer than gold stars ever would. In the afternoon, another teacher takes over, this one younger, with ink-stained fingers and an eagerness to please his elder. He teaches you grammar through stories, logic through puzzles. You learn to diagram the sentence, "The candle flickers because the wind speaks." He asks, "Can wind speak?" and then lets the silence linger until one boy says, "No, but we say it does, because wind, too, has will." No one laughs, not even Sayid, but you can tell he approves. Not all your lessons happen on the mat. You are sometimes summoned into the family library, where your uncle waits with scrolls open and a brow furrowed. He quizzes you on lineages, not just your own, but those of famous poets and generals. You are expected to remember who sired whom, who died in which battle, and what wisdom was written on their tombstones. And always, always, you must speak in full sentences. No slouching, no slang. You don't say yes. You say, "As you have spoken, it is true." At first, it feels heavy. Later, it becomes music. You start to notice who speaks like a scholar and who doesn't. You hear your cousin slip in a colloquialism, and the adults wince so subtly you almost miss it. Almost. You begin to correct your own siblings under your breath. Not out of pride, but because words, you're starting to realize, can raise or ruin a person. One day, a guest arrives from Baghdad, a judge, with robes that rustle like paper. You are told to sit quietly and listen as he debates legal theory with your uncle, but then, unexpectedly, he turns to you and asks, "What do you make of the parable of the two brothers and the date tree?" Your heart races. You know the story. You've read it, but now you must speak. You straighten your back and say, "One brother gave the tree to the poor. The other called him foolish. But in giving, the first became rich in the hereafter." The judge narrows his eyes. "And which brother are you?" You blink. "I'm the tree, sir, still growing." There's a pause. Then a slow smile. Later, your mother will whisper that your answer was clever, but you'll still wonder if it was correct. There are no clear lines between praise and correction here. The teachers do not always say what they mean. The silences carry messages. And sometimes, the most dangerous thing you can do is answer too quickly. In your free time, which is really just less structured time, you practice calligraphy, not just for beauty, but for discipline. Every curve must follow rules. The pen teaches patience. You trace a single word, over and over, adab, the same word that guides how you eat, how you sit, how you think. And by the time the sun begins to set behind the arches of the courtyard, and the evening call to prayer rolls out over the rooftops, you are tired in a way that isn't quite physical. It's the tiredness of being molded, of knowing that every word you speak is being weighed. Every sentence you form is being judged, not just for grammar, but for soul. You rest that night with your tablet by your side, ink still drying on the final verse you copied. The room is quiet, but in your dreams, the lessons continue. Because here, in Moorish Spain, childhood is not about freedom. It's about formation, and your mind is the first room they build. The sun is high again, and the tiles in the courtyard are too warm for bare feet now. You stay in the shade, where the air smells faintly of figs and cumin. Today is not a day for studying ink and grammar. Today, you are to observe. Not books this time, people. She arrives through the north archway, not grandly, not loudly, but with a presence that commands stillness. A long veil trails behind her, almost touching the ground. Her steps are measured. You've seen her before, this woman with the firm jaw and silver bangles that never jingle. Her name is Fatima, and though no one ever says it aloud in front of guests, she is a slave. But in truth, she is more powerful than most women who carry keys on golden chains. Fatima is not your mother, but she is the one who holds your hand when your fever spikes at night. She is the one who rubs olive oil into your scalp and whispers blessings under her breath. She speaks to you in languages you don't understand yet, some Berber, some Old Arabic, and always in a tone that suggests she knows things your tutors never will. The wet nurse and the amma. Those are the women who raise the children in this household, and not just yours, your cousins, your older brother, even your father, when he was small, were all handed into the arms of women like her, and they remember. They never admit it. Not during dinner, not in prayer, but you see the way grown men glance sideways when Fatima enters a room. There is something sacred in her memory. She knows who wet the bed, who cried for their mother, who mouthed forbidden words in their sleep. Historians still argue whether women like Fatima held social power or were simply silent instruments of the household. But here in this shaded courtyard, it feels obvious. She doesn't need to speak loudly. Influence needs no volume. You watch as she picks up your baby cousin and mutters something to him. Not sweet, not silly, but firm. The child stops fussing. His mother sits nearby, doing embroidery, and doesn't interrupt. This is the unspoken order of things. There's another woman too, Mariam, younger, with laughing eyes and rougher hands. She scrubs the floors in the morning and teaches lullabies by night. She's the one who taught you to trace your first letters in millet flour before you ever held a stylus. No one remembers who taught her, but she passes it down all the same. The lessons they teach aren't always clean, Fatima once told you, as she plucked lice from your hair. If a man forgets who changed his linens, he will never rule with fairness. You weren't sure what it meant at the time, but the phrase stuck to your bones. You start to realize the knowledge passed between women lives below the official education. It doesn't appear on your wooden tablet, but it lingers in your habits, in the tilt of your head, in the way you hold a cup without spilling. When your mother enters the room, the dynamic shifts, but not in the way you expect. She carries authority, of course, but it's quiet, filtered through expression and gesture. Fatima steps back slightly, but not far. She inclines her head, not submissive, acknowledging. They speak in low tones, not about you, though you know you are the topic. Your mother gestures toward your sleeping cousin, then at the ink stains on your sleeve. Fatima nods. Mariam giggles and is immediately hushed. You're not supposed to hear, but children always hear more than adults think. Later that night, you lie beside the sleeping form of your younger sibling and listen as Fatima tells a story. Not a proper story with dragons or caliphs. This one's about her village. A tale of a boy who couldn't stop talking and a goat that walked backwards at every new moon. It's funny, in a way that feels older than humor. You giggle, and she shoos you softly, but smiles. Then she says something you don't forget. A child who listens learns twice. Once from the tongue, and once from the silence after. You don't understand it fully, but it echoes. The next morning, your mother braids your hair with a firmer hand than usual. She doesn't scold, but her fingers speak for her. You squirm, and she pauses. Sit still, she says. You're not a boy from the fields. Then, as she finishes, she adds under her breath, Fatima says you listen too much. She's right, but I like that about you. It's the closest thing to praise you've heard from her in a week. You watch, then, as Mariam wraps your sibling in cloth with almost theatrical precision. She sings a tune, one she learned from her mother, who learned it from hers, though no one knows where it truly began. And that's when it hits you. These women carry a map of knowledge no man ever copies down, a chart of instinct, of rhythm, of small graces passed hand to hand. It's why you flinch less now when startled, why you rinse your hands with care before prayer, why you no longer swing your legs when sitting. They've been raising you, even when you thought you were teaching yourself. One evening, you catch a glimpse of Fatima in the reflection of the fountain. She's alone, just for a moment, her hands in the water. She isn't praying, she isn't working. She's just still. You almost call out to her, but something in you stops. That stillness feels sacred, like a secret. So you walk away without a word, because here, in Moorish Spain, the ones who raise you don't always carry titles. Sometimes they carry silence, and in that silence, everything you've become. The seasons shift subtly here. No snow, no bare trees, just a change in the air, a gentler angle of the sun, a silence in the garden that wasn't there before. You're older now, not quite tall enough to open the heavy doors without help, but tall enough that people begin to expect things of you. You notice the difference not in how they speak to you, but in how they speak about you. She's becoming graceful, someone murmurs of your cousin as she passes. He speaks like his father did at that age. Another says about you. Every glance, every word, now carries a shadow of comparison. Childhood is no longer a shield, and that means your lessons change. You no longer sit beside your sister. One day she was there, the next, gone, moved to another part of the household, a different rhythm entirely. You miss her laugh, the way she whispered rude jokes about your tutor behind the cushion. But when you ask, Fatima only shrugs. She has her own path now, she says. Your sister now learns behind screens, among women whose words are low and carefully chosen. She studies poetry, but not the kind that roars with battle cries. Hers is delicate, metaphor-laced, the kind of verse that praises gardens and moonlight and never says exactly what it means. You, meanwhile, learn law, or at least the beginnings of it. You memorize the rules of trade, the conditions of oaths, the degrees of punishment for lying about goats, or shortchanging a neighbor on grain. The rules are not told as threats, but as blueprints, how to build a just world, or how to avoid its collapse. Your tutor now is sharper than Saeed Idris, younger, more ambitious. He drills you on logic problems and hands you short parables that twist back on themselves like vines. You like him less, but you learn faster. And while you scribble verses and conjugate verbs, your sister is learning something else entirely. You pass her one evening on the way to the bathhouse. She doesn't wave. She keeps her eyes low, but you see the ink on her fingers. Later, Fatima finds you and hands you something, a folded scrap of parchment. You unfold it to find a poem, not signed, not dated. The calligraphy is familiar. It's your sister's. It reads, "My cage is carved of cedar wood, its lock made not of key but good. If I should sing, I sing within a song that never touches skin." You don't ask how Fatima got it. You just fold it up and hide it under your blanket. Historians still argue whether girls in Al-Andalus were sheltered or secretly powerful. Perhaps the truth lives in that poem, in the tension between the cage and the voice inside. One afternoon, a great aunt visits. You've never seen her before. She's tall, robed in indigo, and walks with a staff tipped in silver. Everyone defers to her, even your mother. She doesn't speak to you directly, but when she sees your sister, she pauses, tilts her head. Later, you hear that the aunt has offered to take your sister to Granada to learn the art of letters and the quiet politics of noblewomen. No one asks your sister. They simply tell her what an honor it is. And she smiles. A small one. That night, you see her sitting in the courtyard alone. She's holding a rose, not plucking its petals, not smelling it, just holding it. You sit nearby, saying nothing. After a while, she whispers, "They tell me I'm going to be a pearl, but I feel more like the shell." You don't know what to say, so you offer her a piece of honey bread from your sleeve. She takes it, and for a moment, you are just children again. But only for a moment. The next morning, she's gone. In her place, the household becomes quieter. No laughter from behind curtains, no soft singing during chores. the courtyard feels larger, somehow emptier. You throw yourself into your studies, more legal terms, more memorized sermons. You learn how to write contracts, how to break them, how to cite hadiths to support your reasoning. You start practicing debate. Two boys stand opposite one another, arguing whether a man may sell what he does not yet own. The answer doesn't matter as much as how you say it. Measured tone, deliberate phrasing, control, and always control. One day, your father brings you into the public square to watch a proceeding. A man is being fined for building a wall too close to his neighbor's window. The judge quotes 3 scholars, and the man bows without protest. You look at your father, who whispers, "Do you see now why words matter more than fists?" You nod, but part of you misses the days when lessons were hidden in games, and power lived in lullabies. Still, you begin to understand something else. Knowledge is armor. The more you learn, the more space you are given. You speak with greater ease now. Your tutors ask for your opinions. Your father nods approvingly. Even Fatima calls you little judge when you correct your younger brother's behavior. But you wonder about your sister. You ask Fatima once, carefully, whether she's doing well. Fatima smiles, but doesn't answer right away. Then she says, "A good pearl knows how to shimmer without showing its shape." You don't understand fully, but again, it echoes. That night, you return to the parchment under your blanket. You read the poem again. Slowly, you close your eyes, and for the first time in many days, you dream not of ink or scrolls or quartz, but of a cage made of cedar wood, glowing softly under moonlight, and of a voice singing inside, quiet and unbroken. Because here, in Moorish Spain, boys are shaped to lead, but girls are taught to endure. Both are raised with rules, but not the same ones. You start to notice the edges now, the quiet corners of the system, the seams where expectation meets resistance. It doesn't happen with shouting or open defiance. No child in your world throws tantrums in the marketplace or stomps down palace halls. Rebellion here wears soft shoes. It speaks in double meanings. You're older, maybe 10, but already. You've learned the most useful tool is silence. Not empty silence, but loaded silence. A pause long enough to make a teacher wonder if you're being thoughtful or bold. A small delay before obeying. Just enough to suggest you could have said no. Your cousin does it best. She's barely 8, but she's mastered the art of politeness that bites. She responds to scolding with a bowed head and eyes too calm to be truly sorry. She curtsies and compliments with perfect form, yet every phrase feels like a mirror held up to the adult speaking. You envy her, a little. She once mimicked your uncle's formal prayer tone so perfectly that the room went silent for a full breath. Then someone coughed. Laughter followed. The adults tried to pretend it was harmless, but you saw the way your aunt's eyebrow twitched. There are limits. Children like you are praised for obedience, not wit, but some of you, quietly, carefully, test the edge. You begin to memorize not just texts, but moments. Which servant looks away when you pause too long at the gate? Which elder's tone softens when you speak with a slight quiver in your voice? These are not things written in your books, but they're part of the curriculum all the same. Sometimes, rebellion looks like forgetting. You accidentally leave your sandals by the wrong door. You take longer than usual to return a scroll. You quote a hadith slightly out of order, then apologize sweetly. Historians still argue whether children in Moorish Spain had agency, or were simply learning to survive within beautiful cages. But you've started to feel it, this sliver of space where small choices still breathe. Even your tutors know, one of them, a thin man named Hafiz with a face like folded linen, once caught you doodling in the margin of your grammar sheet. A bird, just a simple shape. He looked at it for a long time. Then, without scolding, he said, "You know, some say drawing creatures invites the eye of God, but others believe he already knows what lives inside you. He left the bird there. You never drew another one, but you stared at that page for weeks. Rebellion isn't always about mischief. Sometimes it's laughter at the wrong moment. You remember when your classmate Hamid let out a snort while reciting a serious passage about hellfire? The tutor paused, everyone froze. Then he said, 'You laugh now, but will you still laugh at judgment?' Hamid didn't smile again for 3 days. Yet later, he whispered that he saw a mouse dart across the floor at that exact moment, and just imagining it sitting through divine punishment made his brain crack open. You both stifled laughter in the washroom afterward. It became a kind of shared secret. You begin to notice the adults sometimes contradict themselves. One elder tells you not to question the prophet's wisdom. Another encourages you to question every verse for deeper meaning. You ask which is correct, and receive a sigh in response. The wise do not ask for simple answers. You start writing your own parables, not for school, just for yourself. One is about a tree that refuses to grow straight. Every gardener tries to bend it. They fail. Eventually, it becomes a bench, crooked but useful. You don't show it to anyone, but you read it aloud in your head at night, like a quiet protest tucked between prayers. In the bathhouse, the older boys talk in coded language. Not vulgar, never that, but layered. "Did you hear what the peacock said to the lamp last night?" one asks. The others chuckle. You're not sure what it means, but you laugh anyway. Later, you realize it's about a nobleman who tripped on his own robes in front of a servant girl. No one repeats it where adults can hear. That would ruin it. Still, the resistance isn't always charming. Sometimes it simmers into bitterness. You see a boy named Khalil stop speaking altogether for a week. No one knows why. His father scolds. His tutor prays. Fatima brings him sweets. Nothing works. On the 8th day, he suddenly recites an entire verse flawlessly, then asks to be excused. No one mentions it again. Sometimes rebellion comes with tears, not dramatic ones, the kind that slip out during lessons, then are quickly wiped away. You saw your brother cry once while translating a particularly harsh legal punishment. He said it was dust. You pretended to believe him. The most daring act you've seen came from a girl, not your sister, but her friend, Layla. She was meant to recite a poem before her aunt's birthday feast. Instead, she stood up, paused, and delivered a poem she had written herself. A sharp, strange thing about birds in gilded cages with golden locks. The room applauded politely, but later, Layla disappeared from gatherings for a month. When she returned, she smiled more often, but never spoke in rhyme again. And yet, despite everything, you realize no one punishes you for thinking. Not directly. You begin to see rebellion not as destruction, but as negotiation. A quiet shaping of space where none was offered. A glance that says, "I see you." When someone is trying not to be seen, even Fatima teaches it in her own way. She never contradicts the elders. But once, when you asked if the prophet ever got tired of rules, she replied, "Even the moon needs darkness to shine." You never forgot that. And when your tutor one day asks, "Why do we obey?" you don't quote scripture. You simply say, "Because sometimes obeying gives us room to choose what matters most." He looks at you a long while, then nods. That night, you sneak back into the study room and find the old grammar sheet with your bird on it. It's still there. The ink faded now, but unmistakable. You smile, just a little, because here, in Moorish Spain, rebellion isn't always loud. Sometimes, it wears manners like armor and waits for the right moment to speak. The courtyard is unusually quiet today. even for a household so finely tuned to stillness. The jasmine vines sway in the breeze, but no laughter echoes beneath the arches. The children walk slower, their sandals almost dragging. You feel it in your gut before you see it. Today is a disciplined day. There's no announcement, no drumbeat, no loud decree, just a ripple in the rhythm of the household. Servants speak in clipped tones, tutors stiffen. Even Fatima presses her lips together more often than usual. You've seen it before. Discipline here is not shouted. It does not involve beatings or public shame, not in noble homes like yours. It's delivered with poetry, with silence, with a chilling calm that cuts deeper than any cane. The boy today is Ismail, bright-eyed, clever-tongued. He laughed too loud at the wrong joke, they say. Or perhaps he corrected a guest too bluntly. No one tells you the full story. That's part of the lesson. Ambiguity keeps everyone alert. You're told to gather in the main room, the one with the arched ceiling and the painted verses. Cushions are laid out in a perfect half moon. You take your place among the others, hands folded in your lap. The air feels too still. Then, Ismail is brought in. He's not crying. He doesn't even look afraid. That's what makes it worse. He walks with his eyes forward, chin level, just like your tutor taught you. But his feet drag slightly, like even they resent the ceremony. He kneels at the center, and then the recitation begins. Not of laws, not of punishments, but of poetry. A respected elder reads aloud a verse from a 10th century scholar. The tongue, once loosed, is harder to chain than the lion in the market. A few elders nod, no one smiles. Next comes a parable, a story about a boy who questioned too much and brought ruin to his family's name. The details are vague, the ending, sharp. The boy's name was never remembered. Then, silence. Historians still argue whether this form of discipline was noble restraint or refined cruelty. Sitting there, the lines feel blurred. You glance at Ismail. His face doesn't move, but you notice how tightly he holds his robes in his fists. He's listening to every word, and so are you. No punishment is declared, no apology demanded. The lesson has been delivered. The shame rests not in scolding, but in interpretation. The next day, Ismail returns to study. No one mentions the event, but no one sits too close to him, either. For a while, his laughter dims. You learn that punishment in this world doesn't come with bruises. It comes with distance, with the soft withdrawal of warmth. Sometimes, it's more direct. You remember once being summoned to explain why your recitation was imperfect. The mistake was small, a mispronunciation, a hesitation, but your tutor said nothing. Instead, he made you copy a verse about truth 20 times on a fresh tablet. By the 10th time, you weren't just writing, you were absorbing. You thought it was over. But then, during the evening meal, your father asked you to say grace aloud. Your heart jumped. You stumbled again, just slightly. And then he said, softly, without looking up, "Even a cracked bowl can spill poison." The table fell quiet. You didn't eat much that night. Other times, punishment arrives in symbols. One girl, Layla again, was made to wear a child's robe a size too small after she mocked her governess. No one said it aloud, but the message was clear. Act childish. Be treated like a child. She said nothing, but the way she stood, rigid, proud, arms straining against the fabric, told you everything. Later, you saw her in the garden, her regular robe restored. She was tracing something into the dirt with a stick. When you looked closer, it was a verse. The scorpion bites not in anger, but in pattern. You didn't ask her what it meant. You just remembered it. You also remember the time Mariam dropped a jar in the kitchen. It shattered loud enough to draw attention from 2 rooms away. No one shouted, But later that night, she was not invited to sing lullabies. For 3 nights in a row, she didn't cry, but she hummed to herself in the laundry courtyard, just loud enough for you to hear. Even Fatima, strong as she is, once walked differently for a day. She had spoken too directly to your aunt. No scolding followed, just reassignment. That evening, she served tea to the guests instead of tending to you. When she returned to your side, she said only, "Even palm trees must bend in high wind." And that was that. But not all discipline is cold. Some lessons are given with care. You once lost your temper. You threw a stylus across the room when your ink ran dry. A childish outburst. You expected silence, maybe a story, maybe a punishment. But Fatima just sat beside you, took your hand, and said, "Anger is heat, but heat without shape burns nothing but you." Then she handed you a fresh pot of ink and let you sit there in your shame, not drowning in it, just learning. The most peculiar punishment you've seen came last spring. A boy named Tariq was caught sneaking sweets from the kitchen. He wasn't scolded. He was invited to recite a sermon on temperance in front of the household. He did, eyes lowered, voice shaking. Then he was handed a plate of sweets, told to serve them to everyone but himself. He never stole again. The courtyard teaches you that rules can be beautiful, but when broken, the response is often more beautiful still, crafted like calligraphy, precise as mosaic. And you, like everyone else, are always watching. Because here, in Moorish Spain, discipline is not fire, it is shadow. It shapes you not with pain, but with presence, and the haunting fear of absence. The robe is stiff today, newly woven, just your size, but scratchy in all the wrong places. It clings under the arms and presses at the neck. When you walk, it restricts your stride just slightly, enough to remind you that comfort is never the point. Clothing, you're learning, isn't just fabric, it's instruction. Fatima helps you dress in the morning. Her hands are gentle but unhurried, her fingers precise. You used to wriggle, complain. Now, you stand mostly still. You've come to understand that dressing is not just about covering your body. It's about setting your posture, your tone, your role for the day. The sash is tied higher than yesterday. She adjusts it without asking, then smooths the front of your tunic. You glance at yourself in the polished brass mirror. The face is still yours, but the robe makes you older, quieter. You can already feel yourself behaving differently. Later, when you cross the courtyard to your lesson, the sandals make no sound. They're made of soft leather that wears down quickly, designed for dignity, not play. You once tried to run in them, just once. The sole slipped on the stone, and you scraped your knee. No one scolded you, but the silence afterward made the lesson clear. Your cousin walks beside you today. His robe is darker, trimmed with embroidery that signals his family's wealth. He walks with his hands folded just right, elbows slightly bent, head tilted at a respectful angle. You try to mirror him, but when no one's looking, he mutters, "This thing itches like a bee sting." You stifle a laugh, but he grins. Then, with a quick glance behind, he lifts the hem of his robe just enough to show a bright red cloth tied around his ankle. A secret rebellion. You raise an eyebrow, he winks. Historians still argue whether clothing in Moorish Spain was primarily symbolic or socially strategic. But you're starting to see that it's both and more. Your tutor once said, "The body must be dressed before the mind can be shaped." At the time, it sounded like something grown-ups said when they couldn't explain things clearly. But now, you feel it. The way your sleeves restrict sudden movement. The way your belt reminds you to sit straight. Even the weight of the fabric around your shoulders. It's all training. You pass by Layla in the inner corridor. Her robe is softer, flowing. dyed the pale green of young olives. A modest veil covers her hair, pinned with a carved bone clasp. She meets your eyes only briefly, but you notice her fingertips are stained with ink again. Later, you'll hear someone whisper that Layla's veil is too thin, her eyes too bold, but you'll also hear that her poetry was recited in the house of a judge last week. So, which detail carries more weight? You think of your sister then, her careful braids, her silk slippers, her slow, deliberate way of entering a room. She was taught not just how to behave, but how to carry herself like a line of script, curved, controlled, always intentional. You once asked Fatima why girls wore robes that swayed, while boys wore robes that stiffened. She paused before answering. Then she said, "Because boys must be reminded to contain themselves. Girls must be reminded they already do." That answer felt like a riddle, but with each passing day, it makes more sense. Clothing becomes the first language you speak before your mouth opens. When you attend a public gathering with your father, he chooses your robe himself, a deeper blue with a thin gold trim. He says nothing, just hands it to you folded. You understand what it means. Today, you must represent him. At the gathering, an elder notices the robe and raises his eyebrows. The young one comes wrapped in sky and sun. He says, not unkindly. You bow, not too deep, not too quick. Your sleeves flutter slightly, but settle without a wrinkle. You've practiced that. At meals, you learn to adjust the folds of your garment so that nothing spills. Not food, not feeling. Once, you caught your younger brother fiddling with the hem of his tunic, tugging it anxiously before a reading. Your mother gently placed her hand over his and whispered, "Let the robe hold you." That night, you repeated the phrase to yourself before sleep. Let the robe hold you. You start to notice the robes of others more carefully. The way a scholar's sleeves fray just slightly at the cuffs from constant turning of pages. The ceremonial richness of a visiting emir's cloak, stiff with gold thread and nearly unwalkable. Even the servant's clothing speaks. Simple, yes, but meticulously clean, often with a single hidden stitch of color that says, I, too, have pride. One day, you're invited to witness a coming-of-age ceremony. The boy is 13, trembling slightly as he steps into the main hall. His robe is pure white, freshly dyed, uncreased. A teacher recites a passage about responsibility. Then, with a solemn gesture, his father fastens a thin, braided cord around the boy's waist. No applause, just nods. The boy bows. His hands never tremble again. You wonder what kind of robe you'll wear when that moment comes for you. Fatima tells you, later, that your grandmother used to dye fabrics with pomegranate skin and crushed rose petals. She said clothing should smell of something real. Fatima smiles, folding a tunic into a cedar-lined chest. Something alive. That night, you open your chest and sniff your own robe. It smells mostly of starch and dry air, but beneath that, just faintly, you catch the trace of olive oil, ink, and lemon blossom. You smile, because here, in Moorish Spain, a child is dressed not only for modesty or beauty, but for formation. And every fold of cloth teaches you how to move through a world that watches you before it listens. It's the 10th day of Shawwal, and for once, the house is alive with sounds you're not expected to suppress. Laughter bubbles from the kitchen. The courtyard fountains seem to splash louder. Even the older servants hum while sweeping the walkways. Something is different. Something is allowed. It's a festival day. You wake to the smell of rosewater and honey drifting in from the preparation hall. You blink against the light as it dances across the mosaic tiles. Your room already warming with the morning sun. Outside your door, children are whispering, not in secret tones, but an uncontained delight. This is one of the rare times joy is sanctioned. You rise quickly, your festival robe already laid out by Fatima. It's softer than your usual one, with flowing sleeves and stitching in saffron thread. You can tell she's proud of it. She adjusts your belt and smooths your hair, smiling with the quiet satisfaction of someone who's survived 3 dawns of preparation. You look like someone who doesn't need correction, she says, half smiling. You beam. In the garden, strings of colored fabric hang between the pillars. Platters are being arranged. Dates, almond cakes, sticky pastries glistening with syrup. Silver pitchers of milk chilled with snow from the mountains stand beside ceramic bowls of spiced nuts. You don't wait to be told. You know better. You sit on the low bench with your legs folded, eyes wide, but hands folded in your lap. Children don't grab here. Even joy has a shape. Still, the energy is different. Your cousin sticks his tongue out behind a jug. A girl from the neighboring estate spins in a circle when her mother isn't looking. A small boy drops a fig and snorts as it splats. No one scolds. Not yet. Historians still argue whether festival days truly relax the structure of elite Andalusian households, or merely offer the illusion of freedom wrapped in sweet syrup. But to you, in this moment, it feels real enough. After the morning meal, the courtyard opens to extended family. Uncles arrive in heavy robes with laughter in their voices. Aunts rustle in silk and ask about your studies, their eyes sharp behind painted lids. The younger children gather near the shade of the fig tree for storytelling. You're just old enough now to sit a little farther away, to pretend you've outgrown it. But you still listen. You always listen. The storyteller today is a family friend, a merchant who's seen cities you only know from maps. He has a booming voice and a quick tongue. He tells of a camel that outwitted a sultan, of a monkey that stole a philosopher's ring, of a clever girl who disguised herself as a boy to study medicine in Seville. You pretend not to smile at that one, but it's the one you'll remember later. The music begins. Not drums, not yet, but lutes and flutes, played lightly, weaving through the garden like the scent of cinnamon. No one is dancing, not officially, but your cousin's feet tap beneath the table. One of the younger girls twirls in time to nothing in particular. You slip away to the outer walkway and find Layla crouched near the jasmine trellis, a date in one hand, a folded paper in the other. She looks up and grins. They can't make me stop writing on festival days. She passes you the page. It's a riddle written in verse. I am worn, but not weary, tied, but never bound. I speak in silence and hold what cannot be found. You grin. A robe? You guess. She shakes her head. Your name? You blink, then laugh. And she laughs too, freely, without checking who's listening. You hear a bell ring faintly from the hall. It's time for formal thanks. Everyone gathers in the great room. Platters are removed. Rugs are rolled out for prayer. The grown-ups take their places. You line up with the other children, hands folded, eyes down. The eldest uncle gives a sermon. It's not like the ones at the mosque. It's more personal. He thanks the women for their preparations, praises the children for their manners, recounts the lineage of the family with rhythmic, poetic cadence. You find yourself swaying slightly to the rhythm. It's calming, almost hypnotic. Afterward, you're allowed to roam. Not far, never far, but farther than usual. You and your cousin sneak behind the herb garden and nibble sweet leaves. You try to climb a fig tree but stop when your robe snags. You both fall back, laughing. A servant catches you and raises an eyebrow. You both freeze. She pauses, then hands you each a plum and walks away. Later, a game of memory is arranged. You sit with older cousins and test your recall of proverbs and sayings. A friend's glance is better than a foe's speech. He who knows how to wait is never late. The winner is given a small pouch of rose sugar. You don't win, but you remember every proverb. At dusk, small lanterns are lit, tiny flames glowing behind painted glass, casting shifting shapes across the courtyard walls. You sit with Fatima, your head against her shoulder. She hums softly, fingers stroking your hair. She smells of cardamom and lavender. You don't say anything. You don't need to. As the stars blink into the sky, you feel the weight of the day settle gently on your chest. Not heavy, just full. You think about the joy that was allowed today. The sweets, the music, the laughter, all of it tightly wrapped in structure, but shining through anyway. Fatima whispers. One day of permission reminds you why the rest matter. You nod. You think you understand. Because here, in Moorish Spain, joy is a carefully opened window, not a door. And on festival days, the breeze reminds you how sweet freedom feels when it's rare. The next morning feels quieter than usual, not because anyone has asked for silence, but because joy has a way of lingering, then slipping away, like the scent of smoke after lanterns burn out, or the ache in your cheeks from too much smiling. You move more slowly. Everyone does. There's a kind of hush that follows a day of permitted delight, as if the house is unsure how quickly to return to its usual rhythm. You sit in the study hall, your stylus poised above the tablet, but your mind is still tracing the patterns from last night's lantern light. Then the new tutor enters. He's not tall, but his presence arrives before he does, like the first cold wind of winter. He carries no scrolls, no instruments, no honeyed dates for prizes, just his own gaze, sharp as a falcon's. His name is Muallim Karim, and you hear the word Hizb murmured when he passes. Not just a teacher, an enforcer of order, a man trained to spot chaos before it blooms. He surveys the room. Children sit straighter. Ink pots are adjusted, elbows tucked in. He begins not with a lesson, but with a question. What is the greatest danger to a house like this? You glance at your cousin. He stares straight ahead. One boy raises a timid hand. Enemies? Karim shakes his head. Enemies are obvious. Another tries. Poverty? Still no. Then he says it. The undisciplined child. The room tightens. You feel it in your shoulders, in the way your stylus suddenly seems heavier. He speaks calmly, but with precision. One spoiled boy can undo the dignity of 3 generations. One loud girl can shame a lineage with a single laugh at the wrong moment. He pauses, lets the silence speak. You shift slightly. Not enough to be noticed. You hope. Historians still argue whether this fear was exaggerated or deeply rooted in the political fragility of noble households. After all, Al-Andalus was a land of rival courts and shifting alliances. Appearances mattered more than marble. Karim continues. He quotes scholars who warned that children raised without restraint grow into adults who confuse want with right. He tells the story of a young prince who loved riddles more than reports, and how his city fell to rebels while he dined on apricots and pomegranates. Do you know what became of him? Karim asks. No one breathes. He was spared. They left him alive because he wasn't worth the blade. Your cousin's hand tightens around his stylus. You glance down at your own robe. For the first time, the saffron thread feels too bright. From that day on, lessons take on a new intensity. You are corrected more quickly. Praise is rarer. Laughter is something you save for after the lamps are out. The curriculum shifts too. More law, more ethics, fewer parables, more emphasis on consequences. You recite the penalties for theft, for slander, for wandering eyes and wandering tongues. Karim does not yell. He doesn't need to. His expectations wrap around the room like a net. You're not afraid of him exactly, but you are alert. He calls on you more often than others. At first, you think it's because you answer well. Then you realize it's because he wants to test your limits, to press gently, then firmly, to see if you bend or snap. You don't snap, but you feel the bend. And then, one afternoon, he says something that lodges deep in your chest. A disciplined child is not one who never strays. It is one who knows when they're being watched and when they're not. Watches themselves. You don't write it down, but you remember every word. After class, you find Fatima trimming herbs by the kitchen. You tell her what he said. She doesn't respond right away. Then she says, "There are those who build fences and those who plant hedges." You blink. She snips a sprig of mint. Fences keep people out. Hedges grow slowly, but once thick, they keep even the wind from pushing through. You wonder which one you're meant to become. In the evenings, your thoughts race more. You lie awake longer. Kareem's lessons echo in your head like chimes in a windless tower. You begin double-checking your prayers. You rehearse your responses before speaking. One morning, you catch your younger brother sneaking an extra sweet. Instead of laughing, you frown. He looks guilty, but not because he's been caught, because he sees your expression. And just like that, you understand. You've become the watcher. You think about Layla. You haven't seen her smile in days. She speaks politely. She reads dutifully. But something about her movements feels practiced. One day, you catch her staring at the wall, her eyes unfocused. When you ask if she's tired, she shrugs and says, "I'm just remembering how to behave." You offer her one of your scribbled riddles. She reads it, smiles faintly, then folds it into a tiny square and tucks it inside her sleeve. It's enough. And then, during a family gathering, the topic of discipline comes up again. An uncle speaks proudly of how his son wakes before dawn without prompting. Another brags about his daughter's perfect silence during meals. Your father says nothing at first. Then, quietly, he says, "I would rather raise a child who knows when to speak than one who merely stays silent." The room stills. You glance at him, surprised. Later, you ask what he meant. He doesn't look up from his writing. Just says, "Obedience is useful, but wisdom is preferable." That night, you think long and hard about what kind of child they're trying to raise you into. Not just obedient, not just silent, but aware, measured, because here, in Moorish Spain, the greatest fear isn't noise, it's disgrace, and the antidote is not love, it is discipline, sharpened like a blade no one dares unsheath. The courtyard is hushed again, but not with tension this time. Instead, it hums with anticipation, the kind that follows a quiet invitation rather than an order. You're called to the fountain just before midday, where the sun filters through lattice screens and makes dappled light on the stone floor. Today is for games, not the chasing, tumbling kind you once craved, but now quietly avoid. No running, no shrieking, no wild hands. These are games of the mind, measured, composed, wrapped in riddles and memory. You sit cross-legged on the mat with 3 other children. A servant sets down a polished board inlaid with ivory and walnut. The chess pieces are carved like towers, horses, and crescent moons. You've seen this game played by scholars and generals alike. Today, it's your turn. Your cousin opens with a slow move, bishop first, unorthodox. You respond in kind. Around you, others are watching, not judging, not quite, but assessing. This is not just play. This is performance. Your tutor once told you that games are not escape, they are simulation. The mind must be trained to anticipate, he said, just as the body is trained to kneel, to rise, to bow. And here you are, leaning over the board, measuring consequence, scanning for traps. But chess is only one of the games today. After the match, you're invited to a circle beneath the date tree. Here, the elder children recite lines from poems that end in riddles. I am your servant until you strike me. I am silent until you drown me. What am I? You pause, think, then murmur. Ink. The others nod, approving, no applause, just acknowledgement. Then come the memory games. A tray is laid out, objects covered in a silk cloth. The cloth is lifted for 5 seconds, then returned. You must name everything you saw: a spindle, a cinnamon stick, a feather, a coin, a piece of broken tile. You whisper each one, steady. You miss only one, the tile. It had a faint crack in it, shaped like a crescent. You remember it too late. Layla remembers them all? Of course she does. Historians still argue whether these games were a form of gentle education or veiled social sorting, whether they nurtured confidence or ranked you without saying so. But to you, they feel like tests you didn't know you were studying for. After the formal games, the rules loosen slightly. Not much, but just enough to allow a flicker of mischief. You see your cousin hiding a date pit in the folds of his robe, then pretending to divine what another boy is thinking. Everyone laughs, softly, but sincerely. You and Layla are handed a set of shells painted with letters. She arranges hers into a poem before you even finish spelling your name. You pretend to sulk. She offers you the last shell, a painted green one. You turn it between your fingers. I like this one, you say. She nods. It's from the sea. They say if you hold it close, it tells the truth. You raise it to your ear. Nothing but the wind. Still, you pretend to hear something. She smiles. You realize that here, even in play, nothing is free from meaning. Every game, every phrase, every gesture teaches or reveals. At midday, a guest joins the gathering, a man with a trim beard and soft hands. A merchant from Fez, perhaps, or a minor court official. He watches as 2 children play a strategy game with stones and lines drawn in dust. He comments, "A clever child is worth 3 slow scribes." The host laughs politely, but you sense something behind the words. Later, you overhear adults discussing the guest's daughter. Apparently, she plays the oud and quotes philosophers in 3 languages. You wonder what kinds of games she plays. As the sun begins to dip, the games wind down. A few children remain near the fountain, now playing a quiet word chain game in Arabic. You join, offering hilm, forbearance. Someone counters with muhtalim, a dreamer. The chain continues, soft and slow. Then Layla offers a word that stumps everyone. Samt. Silence. It hangs in the air, and no one follows it. Not because they can't, but because they choose not to. The chain ends there. You walk with Fatima later, helping her carry folded cloths back to the storeroom. She's quiet until she says, "Do you know why they play these games with you?" You shrug. "To teach us?" She smiles. "That too, but also to show you who you are when no one tells you what to do." You think about that. Later that night, you're in bed, robe folded neatly at your feet, and you whisper the words from earlier. Servant until struck, silent until drowned. You remember the riddle, you remember the ink, and then you think of the games, the rules that weren't written, the glances that weren't explained, the laughter that paused just short of boldness. You think of your own answers, your own silences, because here, in Moorish Spain, even play is a kind of preparation. And children are trained not just to win, but to understand the cost of every move they make. The next morning begins like so many others, quiet, measured, a slow unfolding of light over the tiled rooftops. But something is different in the air. It isn't a festival day, nor a teaching day. but something in between. A day without a name. The kind of day that lets you notice the things usually hidden behind routine. You're in the corridor near the laundry basin when you hear it. Soft voices. Not chanting lessons. Not correcting posture. Just talking. You pause, just out of sight. Fatima is speaking to the new kitchen girl, Noura, you think her name is, about the house across the way. They say the boy there never learns his place, Fatima murmurs, folding a cloth with slow precision. Even his slippers go wherever they please, Noura giggles. I heard he asked to sit at the scholars' table. At 10. Fatima hums in disapproval, but not harshly. Poor child. He's being watched, and doesn't know it. You keep still, not to spy, but because you realize something. This conversation isn't about gossip, it's a lesson. You begin to understand that not all teaching comes with ink and parchment. Some truths are passed down in corners, between chores, through glances exchanged over folded linen and steaming pots. Later, while helping Miriam carry a basket of mint and dates to the pantry, you ask her what she meant the other day when she said, "A kitchen hears everything." She smiles. Because people speak freely when they think no one important is listening. And that's when they reveal what matters most. You nod? She nods back. A mutual understanding. You start listening more carefully, not to your tutors, not to the men with long beards and sharp phrases, but to the quiet spaces, the servant who hums a melody older than Cordoba, the maid who mutters a proverb under her breath while stirring lentils, the guard who speaks to the cat as if it understands him. Historians still argue whether servants in noble Andalusian homes were invisible or quietly essential to the rhythm of daily life. But from where you stand now, it's clear. They see everything. They carry messages no pigeon ever could. Fatima once told you, "The people who serve you teach you what others won't say." You think of that when Noura helps you adjust your robe after you stumble. She doesn't correct you aloud. She just gives a slight tug at your belt, then pats your back twice. The second pat is the lesson. You pass through the atrium and hear an older servant telling a story to the younger boys. Something about a prince who disguised himself as a baker to learn humility. You know the story, but the way he tells it, with flour still on his hands and a crooked grin, makes it feel like he wrote it himself. You linger at the doorway. He sees you, nods, and keeps going. That evening, you sneak into the storage room, just briefly, and find Miriam copying something into a tiny booklet. Her handwriting is messier than yours, but her words are rhythmic, hypnotic. She's writing recipes, but in a way that sounds like spells. Boil with patience, stir with gratitude, never serve on a bitter heart. She doesn't see you. You step back without interrupting. It strikes you then. These women and men have memorized just as much as your tutors. Their wisdom isn't recorded in libraries. It's stored in habits, in hands, in hushed voices over steaming pots and sun-warmed bricks. The next morning, when you reach for your sandals, they have been placed slightly apart, not aligned as usual. You pause. You know this is a message. You glance at Fatima. She's watching. You bow your head slightly, adjust them yourself, and step in correctly. She says nothing, but she smiles. Later that day, as you pass through the servants' quarters, you hear someone reciting a rhyme to a crying child. Cry if you must, but dry your eyes before the call to prayer. You repeat it to yourself later, not because you need it, but because something about the rhythm feels like armor. One night, you wake to fetch water and pass by the main hall. Two servants are scrubbing the mosaic floor. Voices low. "I told him not to marry that merchant's daughter," one says. "Too many silks, not enough sense." The other chuckles. "He'll learn. Some lessons take wives." You cover your mouth to stifle a laugh. Not because it's cruel, but because it's true. Even in their jokes, you hear lessons. One afternoon, you sit beside Layla under the cypress tree. She tells you she learned a new verse today, not from her tutor, but from her nursemaid. She said, "If you want a secret kept, speak it to the bread." You blink. Why bread? Because bread doesn't answer. And if you forget the secret, someone will eat it. You both laugh, but you remember it. And later, when you have something you don't dare say aloud, you find yourself whispering it to a crust before tossing it to the birds. Not because you believe, but because it feels safe. Because here, in Moorish Spain, some of the most important lessons are whispered between pots and footsteps. And the people who are told to stand behind you are often the ones who've already walked farther than you ever will. The child in the house across the alley has fallen ill. You know this not because anyone tells you, but because of the signs. The servant who usually sings while beating carpets has gone silent. The shutters that once opened to let in morning sun now stay closed. And early this morning, you saw a clay bowl smashed on the doorstep, a quiet warning, broken on purpose. Illness has entered someone's household, and it travels like smoke, unseen but heavy. Inside your home, precautions begin. The brass ewer for hand washing appears more frequently. Mint is steeped in everything: tea, baths, even the water used to mop the floors. Fatima rubs crushed rosemary along windowsills, muttering something you don't quite catch. When you ask what she's doing, she replies, keeping the bad breath of envy and sickness away. You nod. You don't question it, because here, even the invisible things must be respected, especially them. You begin to notice the little talismans tucked into corners, bits of knotted string, scraps of parchment with faded writing, tiny pouches sewn shut and hidden inside pillows. These were always there, but now you look for them. And once you look, you see them everywhere. Historians still argue whether these practices were superstition or spiritual medicine. But when the air grows tense and a child's cough echoes down the alley, even scholars fall quiet. In your own house, everyone watches the youngest closely. Your baby cousin sneezes once, and 4 women rush to the room, not panicked, just alert. You see Fatima hold her tiny wrist and whisper into her palm, then tie a red thread around it, the same thread you wore as a baby. "Is that from the Quran?" you ask. She shakes her head. "It's from my mother. That's older." Later, she explains the thread keeps away. Ain, the evil eye. You've heard of it before, but now you feel it differently. You picture it like a hawk, circling over roofs, looking for cracks in the house's goodness. The adults never say envy aloud, but they say things like, "Mashallah," after compliments. "Praise be," they say, as if to redirect attention away from the child and toward God. You begin doing it too. Even when you don't fully believe it, you say it, just in case. One afternoon, your cousin faints during a grammar lesson, just collapses like a folded blanket. The room goes still. The tutor rushes to his side. Someone brings water. Someone else runs for your aunt. But Fatima is already there. She lifts his head gently, smells his breath, checks his eyes, and nods. It's not serious. Just heat and too many heavy words. Still, she pulls a clove from her apron and rubs it behind his ears. Later, you ask her why. Because the body listens when the heart forgets to. You're not sure what that means, but it feels true. That night, your cousin sleeps with an onion under his bed and a slice of lemon on his tongue. A strange ritual, but he wakes stronger. You start to hear other stories. Miriam talks about a girl who grew too fast and caught a fever from her own shadow. Another servant says she once knew a boy who stared too long at a falcon and lost his voice for a year. You laugh, but not too loudly. Because here, in Moorish Spain, healing is not just a matter of herbs and prayers. It's about attention, how well the house listens to the child. One of the older servants tells you, the body speaks. You just have to learn the dialect. So you listen. You start noticing the shift in air before someone coughs. You learn the signs of a restless night in the folds of the bed linens. You recognize the difference between a hungry silence and a worried one. One morning, Fatima pulls you aside. She places a small cloth pouch in your palm. For protection, she says. You open it carefully. Inside, a tiny folded prayer, a sliver of dry ginger, and what looks like a hair from a black horse. You want to ask why, but you don't. You just tie it to your belt. That day, you walk more slowly, because now you are being watched, not just by people, but by unseen things. You begin to understand that raising children here is not only about training minds or shaping manners. It's about protecting something soft beneath all the robes and rules. When the child across the alley recovers, a tray of sweet rice is sent to your household. It's a sign, a thank you, or maybe just a relief offering to the balance of things. Your mother says to take a small bite, then leave the rest for the birds. Let them carry the illness away, she says. You do as she says. Layla asks you later if you believe in all of it. You shrug. I don't know, but I'd rather not take chances. She nods, then adds, maybe belief is just another kind of protection. You write that down. Later, you fold it into a scrap of cloth and tuck it into your sleeve, not because it's dangerous, but because it feels sacred. That night, before bed, you check your pouch again, still there, still quiet, and you sleep deeply, because here, in Moorish Spain, illness is never just physical. It's tied to envy, to silence, to unseen hands. And a child is not only raised by wisdom, but guarded by ritual, breath, and love that doesn't always need to explain itself. It begins with a candle and a sigh. You're sitting at the edge of your grandmother's room, just as the sun begins to lower itself into the rooftops, flooding the floor with gold. She's seated on a thick cushion, her feet tucked beneath her, her fingers gently working a string of olive wood beads. She's not reading. She doesn't need to. The stories are already inside her. Tonight, you're not asked to recite. You're not asked to translate, memorize, or correct your posture. Tonight, she calls you closer with a glance, not a word. So you move carefully, robe whispering against the floor, and sit by her knee. Then, softly, she begins. There was once a boy who lived beneath the walls of Madinat al-Zahra. He was clever, quiet, and always watching. One day, he found a coin in the road, not gold, not silver, but made of glass. He pocketed it without thinking, and that night, he began to dream in languages he didn't know. You listen, eyes wide, heart still. This is not one of your lessons. It is something older, something that moves like smoke and settles in the corners of your chest. She speaks of a girl who outwitted a jinn by quoting her grandmother's cooking advice, of a young thief who learned to write poems instead of steal and became a judge, of a washerwoman who saved an entire town because she knew the stars better than the vizier. Each tale is wrapped in softness, but lined with meaning. You begin to see yourself in them. And yet, they are never told directly. Your grandmother does not point her finger and say, "This is who you should be." Instead, she folds the advice into layers of image and metaphor. "A sharp tongue can feed you," she says once, "but a quiet ear builds the house." Later, as she trims the wick of the lamp, she adds, "Courage doesn't always look like defiance. Sometimes it looks like stillness." Historians still argue whether oral storytelling among the women of Al-Andalus shaped politics or simply preserved culture. But when you sit here, under the sway of her voice, it's hard to imagine power working any other way. One evening, she calls for Layla to join you. The two of you sit shoulder to shoulder, your robes barely brushing, as she tells the story of a queen who disguised herself as a market woman to hear what the people truly thought. She wore perfume to smell like luxury, your grandmother says, but carried onions to remember hunger. Layla's eyes widen. Yours do too. Later. As you walk the long corridor back to your rooms, Layla whispers, "Do you think the queen ever wanted to stay in the market instead?" You think about it, then nod. Maybe that's why she ruled well. Your grandmother's stories never end with weddings or wars. They end with questions, echoes. She once told you a tale about a boy who planted date seeds in secret, knowing he'd never live to eat them. But someone will, she said, and that's enough. It's one of the few stories that made your tutor pause when you told it back in class. He asked, "And what is the moral?" You answered, "That some goodness has no witness." He nodded, then didn't ask you anything for the rest of the day. You come to realize that your grandmother sees parts of you no one else mentions. Not your posture, not your memory, but the way your fingers twitch when you're nervous. The way you hold your breath before answering a difficult question. She tells you, children are not empty cups. They are full wells. You just need to lower the rope carefully. One night, she tells a story you've never heard before, about a child who ran away, not in body, but in heart, a child who obeyed every rule, who recited every lesson, who bowed and nodded and never laughed too loud. But deep inside, he had vanished. The story ends when the child hears a song sung by a bird outside his window. It's not a beautiful song, just persistent. And suddenly, he begins to hum along. The story ends there. You wait for her to say more. She doesn't. Instead, she says, "Do you understand?" You nod, slowly, because you do. That night, you sit by the window long after the others have gone to bed, listening to the sounds of the courtyard, the rustle of palm leaves, the faint gurgle of the fountain, a dog barking somewhere far beyond the walls, and beneath it all, the memory of a voice that turns stories into bridges. Because here, in Moorish Spain, not all lessons are inked. Some are breathed into you by someone who's seen more than she ever says, and loves you too much to name the lesson outright. The sun is high when the barber arrives. He travels with little more than a cloth satchel and a wooden stool, but his arrival marks something important. More than just hair, more than just hygiene. It is a threshold. The moment you step into the courtyard and see the other boys gathered, robes neatly folded, eyes wide and hands fidgeting, you know, something is about to change. Fatima gives your shoulder a gentle squeeze before ushering you forward. "It's your turn," she says, in that same tone she uses when placing the first dish of lentils on the table, as if the act is simple but meaningful. You sit, the stool is low, the air thick with the smell of oil and sun-warmed stone. The barber hums as he unwraps his tools, curved blade, horn comb, a cloth soaked in lavender water. He doesn't speak much. He doesn't need to. And then, with a long exhale, the first lock of hair falls to the ground. You feel it more than you see it. The tug, the release, a piece of childhood, gone. When he finishes, your scalp feels bare, open, like the air itself is whispering to it. Fatima ties a scarf around your head, not to hide it, but to protect it. She smiles. You look like someone who knows how to listen. That's the first ceremony. The shedding, later that week, the second arrives, a gift. You're called to the study hall, where your tutor waits with a small wrapped parcel. No one else is present. This isn't a public celebration. It's private. He hands you the bundle. Inside, an ink pot, simple, undecorated, but made from clay that still holds warmth in your palm. You swallow. This is no ordinary object. It means something. He speaks softly. You may now write without supervision. And just like that, the world changes. Because now, your words are your own. Historians still argue whether the rituals of growing up in Moorish Spain were primarily religious, social, or symbolic. But to you, they feel layered, like a door that opens into another room you didn't know existed. You return to your quarters, ink pot carefully held. You don't use it that day. You just set it by the window and watch as the sunlight dances across its rim. That night, Layla finds you in the garden. Her eyes are bright, but her voice is quiet. Did they give it to you? You nod. She holds out her palm. A thin silver chain lies across it, with a tiny pendant shaped like a quill. My aunt gave this to me when I learned to speak before a gathering. You smile. She tucks it away again. Neither of you say what you both know. Something has shifted. Later, a more peculiar ritual takes place. You are summoned to the bathhouse, not alone, but not with children either. Your uncle is there, 2 other men from the family. No one speaks as they help you step into the shallow pool, the water scented with herbs you can't name. They pour water over your head, not hurriedly, not roughly, but not gently either, with intent. When it's done, your uncle says, "Now you know how it feels to carry stillness." You dry yourself without help, dress without guidance, and walk out alone. Afterward, your name is said differently, not altered, just spoken with a touch more weight, as if it carries something new inside it. A few days later, you see your sister again, not at a formal event, not during study, just passing through the hallway. She doesn't speak. She glances once, down, then up, then continues. But in that glance, you both understand. You're no longer the children. There's something unspoken between you now, like the way 2 verses rhyme without touching. You ask Fatima what other ceremonies there are. She doesn't answer directly. Instead, she says, the ones they show you are not the ones that change you. The real ones happen quietly. You think about that the next time you catch your reflection. You look taller, but not by much. You speak more slowly, but your thoughts come faster. The ink pot sits on your shelf, used now, the rim darkened with repetition. You write stories no one asks for. You don't show them to anyone, not yet. You learn that growing up here is not one moment. It is a series of small, deliberate actions. A head shaved, a gift received, a word remembered, a silence kept. You see Layla less often now. She has her own rituals, some known, some secret. One day, you find a folded scrap of parchment near the fig tree. It's not signed, but you know her handwriting. It reads, "I used to think I was the echo. Now I think I'm the voice that comes after it." You don't tell her you found it. You just copy it into your own book. Because here, in Moorish Spain, growing up is not about age. It is about recognition. And every ritual, shaved hair, gifted ink, a whispered phrase, is just a way of saying, you are no longer who you were. There's a low hum in the air these days, something just beneath the daily rhythm, like a string pulled taut but not yet plucked. You don't walk quite the same anymore. People don't speak to you in quite the same way. Your name is called with a longer pause before it. Your answers greeted with less correction and more expectation. You've grown, or rather, you're being watched to see if you have today. Your father calls you into his study, not the public reception hall, not the garden, his private room, where heavy curtains mute the light and the scent of old paper and sandalwood fills the air. He gestures for you to sit. There are no cushions laid out for you. That's part of it. You must know where to place yourself. You fold your robe, sit cross-legged on the mat, and wait. He doesn't speak right away. Instead, he pulls a scroll from the corner of his desk, unrolls it, and reads in silence. You glance once. It's a family genealogy. Without looking up, he asks, "Do you know who you come from?" You hesitate. "Yes." "Father." He nods, still reading. "Say it aloud." So you do. You list the names. Your father's father, his mother, her brother who was a legal scholar, the great aunt who married into a family of judges, the distant cousin who was said to have translated Greek into Arabic in the hills of Toledo. When you finish, he finally looks at you. "Now tell me what you owe them." You know better than to answer quickly. After a long breath, you say, "To remember, to speak well, to act as if their eyes are still on me." Your father leans back. "That's enough," he says, and hands you a copy of the family scroll. Not the original, but a written copy in your uncle's hand. You receive it with both hands, bowing your head slightly. This, too, is a ceremony, though no one names it. Later that afternoon, your tutor begins a new lesson, not on poetry or grammar, or the finer points of chess, but on contracts. He unfurls a sample and begins reading aloud. This is how a man swears a transaction. This is how he signs an oath. This is how he gives over land, or names a witness, or appoints an heir. You listen with a kind of awe, not because the words are beautiful, but because they are binding. Words, once written and spoken in this form, carry weight in the world. He places a seal on the table, iron, carved with the house's emblem, a rising falcon. "You will one day be asked to carry this," he says, simply. "When that time comes, speak only what you can defend." You don't touch it, but you remember its shape. Historians still argue whether children in elite households were truly prepared for responsibility, or merely rehearsed into it. But here, now, you feel it settle around you like a second robe, invisible but heavy. One evening, a guest arrives from Granada, a merchant, round in the belly and bright in speech, who dines with your father and tells stories of silk caravans and sea winds. You're invited to sit silently at the edge of the room, watching how your father speaks, how he nods, when he chooses to interject, when he lets silence speak for him. After the meal, as the guests depart, your father turns to you and says, "What did you notice?" You pause, then say, "He praised the food before tasting it. He quoted 3 poets, and he avoided saying the word debt." Your father smiles. "Good. Words are threads. Learn who knots them and who lets them fray." You begin to observe more closely from then on. The way your uncle greets men of higher status with a slight forward lean, but never with folded hands. The way your mother defers to guests with her gaze, yet always seats herself nearest to the window, the place where sound carries best. You realize that inheritance here is not just property or title. It's tone, timing, poise. One morning, Layla joins you in the courtyard, a parchment in hand. She says little, just passes it to you. It's a list, not of tasks or poems, but questions. You read them slowly. What does your silence protect? What will your name carry when your voice is gone? Who speaks when you're not in the room? You hand it back. She tucks it away in her sash, says nothing more. She doesn't need to. That evening, you write your first formal letter. Not to a friend, not to a cousin, to a scholar in Seville, requesting a copy of an older legal text. Your tutor oversees the draft, correcting only once. "Write with the hand you want history to remember," he says. You choose your words carefully. The letter is sealed and sent the next morning. You watch the courier ride off, the parchment tied in oilskin, tucked into a satchel behind him. It's out in the world now, your words. You don't sleep well that night. You think about the ink, the seal, the way your father looked when he said, "What do you owe them?" Because here, in Moorish Spain, the child is not just an apprentice to knowledge. They are the future of memory, and memory, like ink, must be precise, or it fades. You begin to notice the quiet spaces mothers fill, not the loud kind, no raised voices, no commands barked across courtyards, but the silent stitching that holds the house together. Your mother doesn't teach in the way your tutors do. She doesn't tell stories like your grandmother, nor does she correct your grammar, though you've seen her glance, once or twice, at your scribbled verses with a furrow of amusement. She teaches through pauses, through glances, through presence. She walks through the household like a page already written, neither hasty nor tentative, her rhythm too measured to be interrupted. You rarely see her scold, but her disapproval is unmistakable. A longer silence at dinner, a teacup replaced on its tray with a bit more force than usual, a slight tilt of the head when someone interrupts another. You've seen grown men amend their tone at that tilt. You begin to understand that there are conversations she never has out loud. And yet, they shape the direction of things. One afternoon, you walk into the antechamber and find her sitting with your aunt and another woman, embroidering in near silence. There's a bowl of almonds on the floor, untouched. Their needles move in sync. They aren't discussing politics. They're choosing the guest list for a future marriage celebration. You realize then, decisions don't always happen in study halls or over ledgers. Some are made between stitches. Your mother sees you standing there and gestures gently for you to leave. Not unkindly, just not now. Later, she finds you in the garden, where you've escaped to copy legal phrases into your journal. She sits beside you, doesn't ask what you're writing. Instead, she says, "You've grown into your silence." You blink, unsure whether that's praise or warning. She continues, "Your father speaks of you as if you are a ledger, orderly, promising. But I want to know what doesn't get written." You don't answer right away. Then you say, "Sometimes, I want to leave this house and not have anyone notice. Just for a day. Just to see what disappears." She nods, doesn't seem surprised. "When I was your age, I wanted to become invisible so I could overhear everything." You turn toward her. "Did it work?" She smiles faintly. "I heard too much." The breeze lifts her veil slightly, and for a second, she looks very far away. Not in place, but in time. Historians still argue whether noble women in Al-Andalus wielded influence through family ties or quiet resistance. But here, watching your mother sip from a porcelain cup she never raises above her chest, you understand? Power doesn't always have to speak. Sometimes, it breathes between words. You notice, too, how she teaches your younger brother. She never contradicts your father, but her corrections arrive in different forms. A new bedtime ritual, a robe laid out instead of left for the servant, a whispered reminder before a gathering. Walk as if your name precedes you. Your brother copies your father's posture, but he mimics your mother's gaze. One morning, you overhear her speaking to Layla. "You may be clever," your mother says, "but that is not always protection. Sometimes it draws the wrong eyes." Layla doesn't reply, but she folds her hands more carefully after that, speaks more slowly when guests are near. Your mother doesn't smile in victory. She just continues. There's another lesson she teaches you one night, though she never names it. You come home late from a study session, later than permitted. You expect words, perhaps even silence as reprimand. Instead, you find her waiting in the garden, seated on the low stone bench near the water jars. She doesn't ask where you were. She only says, "The stars are very loud tonight." You sit beside her, quiet for a while. Then you admit, "I lost track of time. We were arguing about a passage. I didn't want to leave before I understood it." She looks at you. "Did you?" You nod. "I think so." She exhales. "Good. Now, next time, leave before you do. Let the rest arrive in silence." You don't forget that. Not when you rise to speak during a gathering and choose to stop one sentence short. Not when your cousin boasts about his new tutor and you choose not to respond at all. You begin to see the shape of your mother in the space where words don't reach. There's a story you remember her telling once, barely a whisper while brushing your hair. The strongest thread is the one no one sees, stitched into the lining of a robe, holding everything up from beneath. You thought she was talking about clothing. Now you're not so sure. One day, you find a note on your table. It's not signed, but you recognize her hand immediately. One line only. Be watchful with the people who mistake quiet for absence. You read it twice, then fold it, not into your journal, but behind your ink pot, close enough to see every day, far enough to pretend you forgot it. Because here, in Moorish Spain, the father may speak your name to the world, but the mother folds it into the house, and her lessons, though never written, are what teach you how to stay whole in the silence between expectation and self. It starts with a missing scroll, not a valuable one, not a legal document, not a rare verse penned by a scholar long buried, but a simple text you had copied by hand, a parable, the one about the crooked bench made from the tree that refused to grow straight. It's gone. You search your room twice, check the folds of your robe, retrace your steps to the library, the basin, the bench under the fig tree. Nothing. You feel the loss more deeply than expected. It's not the ink or the paper. It's what it held. A small part of your voice, shaped into words you were finally proud to keep. You mention it to no one, not at first, not even Layla, though she notices your distracted stare by the fountain. And then the whispers begin. A cousin heard that Hamid was scolded for mocking a verse out loud. Another claims someone found a copy of a parable with your name scratched out at the bottom. You listen, piecing together fragments, feeling something shift. It's not about the scroll anymore. It's about something deeper, something cracking beneath the polished floors of your house. Until now, everything is moved within the rules, even disobedience, even rebellion, wore robes and recited lines. But now, there is something else. Doubt. You begin to feel it in small moments. A girl who once sang quietly while sweeping now only hums a single note. Your tutor pauses longer between questions. Even Fatima, whose presence usually smooths tension like balm, begins to carry herself with more care. Then one morning, Hamid is gone, no one explains, no one announces it. His place on the mat remains empty, his books neatly stacked. When you ask, you're told only, his uncle took him north to study. But, you know, everyone knows. A question was asked, and someone decided the answer was dangerous. You spend more time alone after that, reading, writing, listening to your own silence. Layla finds you beneath the olive tree, your scrolls open, your pen still. She says nothing for a while, then finally. It's starting to show. You look up. What is? She doesn't blink. The crack. You want to argue, to say that nothing is wrong, that this house still holds, that the order still stands. But your throat tightens before the words can rise. Instead, you ask, have you ever wanted to leave? Layla nods. Only when I forget why I stay. You sit together a long time. The next day, your father calls for you again. This time, not in the study, but in the open garden beneath the orange tree. His robe is less formal than usual, his face more tired. He doesn't speak immediately, just motions for you to sit. Then he says, there are times when the house must be tested, not to destroy it, but to remind it why it was built. You nod, not understanding fully. He continues, you've been watching too closely. That's not a warning. It's an observation. You hold his gaze. And if I keep watching, he exhales. Then learn to do it without blinking. That's the only way not to miss the moment it breaks. Historians still argue whether the noble homes of Al-Andalus crumbled from outside siege or quiet disillusion from within. But sitting here, beneath the same tree where you once memorized your first verse, you begin to suspect the truth is both. You write more that week, not parables, observations, tiny scenes, a child scraping her sandal along the edge of the fountain, her eyes focused on nothing, a servant refolding the same cloth 3 times, your tutor chewing his lip before speaking. You begin to collect these like fragments of pottery, useless alone, but maybe telling a story when gathered. Then, the letter arrives, from the scholar in Seville. He's read your request. He praises your phrasing, your humility. Then he writes, "We are living in a time when the ink dries faster than the truth. Be mindful not only of what you write, but when you write it." You read the line 3 times. Then copy it onto the inside cover of your notebook. Later, you find your scroll, folded neatly, left on your sleeping mat. No note, no name, just returned. You open it, the words are yours. But something is different. One line, one single line, has been carefully rewritten. The ending. You didn't write it this way, but now it reads, "And the crooked bench, though useful, was burned to heat the winter bread." You stare at it a long time. You don't tell anyone, but you don't forget. Because here, in Moorish Spain, not all harm is loud. Sometimes, it slips beneath the door like wind. And sometimes, the cracks in a house begin not with rebellion, but with the quiet realization that the rules are not always made to protect you. Evening light drapes itself over the courtyard like a familiar shawl. You sit on the old stone bench beneath the olive tree, the same one where you learned your first proverbs, traced your first letters into dust. Everything feels still, but in a way that suggests holding, not peace. You're older now, not grown, not yet, but old enough to feel the tension between what you've been taught and what you've started to believe. Old enough to ask questions without speaking them aloud. Today, you return to the scroll, the one that came back changed. You read it again, line by line, lips barely moving. You whisper the original ending to yourself, as if conjuring a memory from your own body. You don't know who rewrote it. You never will. That's not the part that matters. What matters is that someone wanted to remind you. Usefulness isn't always protection. You look around the courtyard. It has aged with you, just slightly. The jasmine vines have grown longer. A crack has formed in the corner of the fountain. A few of the cushions used for lessons are patched now, but everything still works, still holds. For now, Layla joins you. A quiet rustle announcing her presence before you see her face. She carries no parchment today, just herself. She sits beside you, close enough that your robes overlap slightly. "I dreamed last night," she says. You turn to her, not speaking. "I was standing in this courtyard, but no one could see me. I shouted, but my voice made no sound. I tried to move, but the tiles were too hot. I wanted to leave, but the gates were too tall. So I sat, and the sky cracked open, and instead of stars, books fell out." You're silent. Then, "Did you open one?" She shakes her head. "I woke up." You nod. "Still, better books than fire." She half smiles. "Maybe." You sit like that for a while. 2 children who aren't children anymore. Not quite heirs, not quite free. Eventually, you both stand. You don't speak as you go your separate ways. That night, your father calls you to his study once more. This time, he places a sheet of parchment before you and says, "Write." You hesitate. "What?" "Your name." You dip the pen. He watches you. "And under it," he continues, "write something you would not say aloud." You blink, but you obey. When you're finished, you place the pen down. You don't reread the line. He takes the paper, folds it once, and seals it with wax. Then, without looking up, he says, "That is the first thing you own." You leave with a strange mix of lightness and weight in your chest. Historians still argue whether the end of Al-Andalus came with fire, or with forgetting, whether it began with soldiers or silence. But here, within these walls, you begin to understand that forgetting isn't a collapse. It's a decision, sometimes chosen, sometimes forced. The next day, Fatima gives you a box. She says nothing about it. Inside, the small pouch she once gave you, now re-sewn, a scrap of your first inked verses, a shell, still painted green, and a folded cloth embroidered with your name, not in Arabic script, but in symbols you don't recognize, older, stranger, woven in silver thread. You look up at her, eyes wide. She only says, "It is good to remember what belongs to you, even when others forget." Then she walks away. Later that week, a letter arrives. Your father opens it with care, then announces that you are to begin study with a scholar from Cortuba, a man who teaches law and memory. No one asks if you're ready. You go. The scholar's home is quieter than yours, tucked behind rows of fig trees and shaded walkways. His name is Yusuf. He wears plain robes and speaks in slow patterns, as if each word must pass through a filter of history. He does not test you with riddles. He does not ask for recitations. Instead, he places 2 scrolls before you, one blank, one filled. He says, "This one was written by a child who lived 5 generations ago. This one is yours to write. The question is not what you will copy, but what you will change." You stare at the blank scroll. You remember every lesson, every robe, every silence, every whisper and riddle and story half told. You dip your pen and begin. Because here, in Moorish Spain, childhood does not end with age. It ends when you're trusted to carry memory, not as a mirror, but as a torch. And now, the light is in your hands. The night settles slowly across the rooftops of Cordoba. The wind sighs through the narrow alleys, brushing the tile and the vine, rustling secrets in the courtyard leaves. You sit by the fountain once more, listening not for voices, but for echoes, soft impressions of what you once were, the clumsy child with ink on his robes, the curious listener at his grandmother's knee, the boy who watched and waited and learned how to walk without disturbing the silence. The stars above flicker like candle flames, steady and small. You find your breath slowing to match their rhythm. Around you, the house sleeps, but the lessons do not. They move through you still, in the way you step, the way you fold your hands, the way you speak only when it adds something worth carrying forward. You have not forgotten the games, or the shadows, or the crack in the scroll. You have not abandoned the poems shared in secret, the glance from Layla across the fig tree, or the weight of your mother's sigh when no one else was looking. These things do not go away. They become part of the way you move through the world. So now, you set down your pen, close your eyes, let the stories drift where they need to go, because memory is a house, and tonight, you are home inside it. Sweet dreams.